It's 4 a.m. on a freezing winter morning in 1250 CE, and you're a 19-year-old student at the University of Paris. You stumble out of your tiny, shared room in a drafty boarding house, your breath visible in the frigid air. You haven't eaten since yesterday afternoon, and you're about to sit through 2 hours of lectures in complete darkness, without notes, on Aristotelian logic delivered entirely in Latin. Welcome to medieval university life. It's not quite what modern college looks like. Today, we're diving into what daily existence was actually like for students and professors at Europe's first universities. And I'm warning you right now, this is going to shatter any romantic notions you might have about scholarly life in the Middle Ages. We're talking extreme poverty, brutal violence, ethnic riots, and graduation banquets that cost more than a craftsman's annual salary. Let's start with a day in the life, because if you think waking up for an 8 a.m. lecture is rough, medieval students would like a word. Chapter 1: From Dawn to Dusk. The first lecture, called The Ordinary, started at 5 or 6 a.m. and lasted 2 hours. At Paris, these morning lectures were deliberately held in darkness without candles. You couldn't take notes. The professor lectured entirely from memory. You had to rely entirely on your ability to listen, comprehend, and remember, all before breakfast, in the dark, in medieval Latin. At Oxford and Cambridge, no meals were provided before 10 a.m., so you endured 4 hours of intense lectures on an empty stomach. 1 hour for breakfast, then back to lectures from noon until 5 p.m. We're talking 8 to 9 hours of lectures per day, 6 days a week. But what were they teaching? Well, the 7 liberal arts: grammar, rhetoric, logic, arithmetic, geometry, music, and astronomy. Everything in Latin. The dominant teaching method was Scholasticism. Masters read authoritative texts, students reflected privately, then engaged in formal debates called disputations, where you'd argue both for and against specific theses. Books were prohibitively expensive. The average student owned maybe 3 or 4 texts total. Learning was overwhelmingly oral. You listened, you remembered, or you failed. And here's where things get interesting, because when those lectures ended and students had free time, medieval university towns became some of the most dangerous places in Europe. Chapter 2: When Students and Townspeople Collide. Medieval students had a unique legal status. They were considered clerics, which meant they couldn't be tried by civil authorities, were exempt from local taxes, and answered only to university officials. You can imagine how much townspeople loved watching drunken students destroy property, start fights, or commit crimes and face basically no consequences. Jacques de Vitry, who studied at Paris around 1200 CE, left us one of the most vivid contemporary accounts. He described bitter ethnic conflicts between students' nations, which were geographic groups that governed university life. Students hurled crude stereotypes at each other. The English were drunkards with tails. The French were effeminate. The Germans were furious and obscene. The Lombards were avaricious and cowardly. He noted that from words they often came to blows. And it wasn't just student-on-student violence. The most infamous conflict happened at Oxford on February 10th, 1355. The Battle of St. Scholastica Day. An argument in a tavern escalated when students threw wine in the tavern keeper's face. Within hours, this had spiraled into a 2-day battle. Local citizens armed with bows and arrows attacked the academic community. Scores of scholars were killed or maimed. The aftermath tells you everything about university power in medieval society. For the next 500 years, I'm not exaggerating, Oxford's mayor and bailiffs had to attend an annual mass for the dead scholars and swear an oath to observe the university's privileges. This tradition continued until 1825. Cambridge University was literally founded because of violence. In 1209 CE, a conflict at Oxford forced scholars to flee after townspeople executed 2 innocent scholars in retaliation for a student allegedly killing a townswoman. These weren't just youthful hijinks. Medieval university towns were genuinely dangerous, and the violence was endemic and structural. Chapter 3: The Universal Student Problem. Now, Surviving all this violence was one challenge. But there's a universal truth that transcends 8 centuries. Students are always broke and always asking their parents for money. We have hundreds of surviving letters from medieval students. One Italian father complained that a student's first song is a demand for money, and there will never be a letter which does not ask for cash. A typical letter from Oxford around 1220 reads, "The matter of money stands greatly in the way of my promotion, as it is now 2 months since I spent the last of what you sent me. The city is expensive and makes many demands, for you must know that without Ceres and Bacchus, Apollo grows cold." That last line means without food and wine, the student grows cold. Even while begging for money, they were showing off their education. But their complaints were legitimate. At Bologna in the 15th century, tuition and living expenses cost approximately 60 florins per year, the entire annual income of a middle-class tailor. A 4-year degree cost 48 to 64 florins when a day laborer earned only 10 florins per year. At Bologna, one desperate letter described a student begging door to door through terrible mud, bringing home nothing unless the Lord go with him. Students lived in various arrangements. Initially, they scattered across town, renting rooms with no oversight. From the 13th century onward, supervised residences called bursae, or colleges, appeared, where masters regulated daily life with strict routines. The richest students might pay 10 guilders yearly, while the poorest paid 2 guilders or were exempted entirely. The truly destitute lived in student almshouses. Many were genuinely poverty-stricken, working as servants, copying manuscripts, singing in churches, or begging to survive. If you're enjoying this look at what university life was really like 800 years ago, hit that like button. And if you want more deep dives into medieval history, make sure you're subscribed, because we're about to talk about graduation ceremonies that could bankrupt families. Chapter 4. The Path to Graduation. Here's something wild. There were no formal written examinations for the bachelor's degree. Students merely had to study for 3 to 4 years and swear under oath that they had heard the required lectures. That was it. The Master's of Arts degree was more rigorous, requiring public disputations and delivering lectures. But here's the catch. Most students never graduated, not because they failed academically, but because of what came next: the inception ceremony. The inception was the ceremony admitting a new master to the teaching guild. And this wasn't a simple diploma handshake. This was a spectacular medieval pageant that rivaled royal weddings in grandeur. The new masters had to host an inception banquet, with guest lists reaching 100 people. The hall was decorated with multicolored banners, gilded columns, and gold-trimmed canopies. The food was overwhelming: boar, deer, bear steaks, pyramids of seasoned pigeons, swan, rabbit, venison. Minstrels entertained diners while couples danced. In Bologna, enthusiastic students would carry their graduating friend in triumph through town, preceded by pipers and trumpeters. The cost? Well, sometimes 100 or even 200 guilders. That's 10 to 20 years of income for a day laborer. Most students simply couldn't afford it and departed without degrees. The medieval university had effectively created a system where only the wealthy could officially graduate, even if poorer students had completed all the academic requirements. Jacques de Vitry wasn't particularly impressed with the whole enterprise. He wrote that almost all the students did absolutely nothing except learn or hear something new. Some studied merely to acquire knowledge, which is curiosity. Others to acquire fame, which is vanity. Others still for the sake of gain, which is cupidity. He criticized professors as swollen with learning, who hated one another and competed for students while caring not a whit about the welfare of souls. So even in the 13th century, people were complaining about academic politics and careerism. Chapter 5. Why any of this matters. Despite the poverty, violence, and chaos, medieval universities were genuinely revolutionary. They created the first international intellectual community where students and masters traveled freely across Europe to study with the greatest teachers. They had developed the scholastic method, rigorous logical argumentation through systematic disputation that trained minds in critical thinking. This introduced academic standards that endure today: doctoral degrees, structured curricula, academic freedom, and the concept of the university as an autonomous corporation. The liberal arts curriculum, the master's degree, the ceremonial aspect of graduation, these all originated in the medieval university. Life was harsh, expensive, and often dangerous. Students sat through hours of lectures in darkness on empty stomachs. They fought townspeople in pitched battles. They begged their parents for money in eloquent Latin. They lived in extreme poverty, and most left without graduating because they couldn't afford the banquet. But these institutions offered something unprecedented: the opportunity for young men from diverse backgrounds to join an international community of scholars that transcended kingdoms, languages, and social classes. They laid the foundation for every university that followed. If you enjoyed this deep dive into medieval university life, smash that like button and subscribe for more analytical approaches to history. What other aspects of medieval daily life would you like to see covered? Let me know in the comments below. As always, thank you for watching. You can find my sources below, and see you in the next one.